Welcome to the World Blitz Chess Championship. The games are about to start in a couple of seconds, but someone very important is missing. Magnus Carlsen, the man who many consider to be the greatest chess player of all time, not to mention the defending champion after taking home the championship the year before. However, 5 more minutes pass, and Magnus is nowhere to be seen. His opponent, GM Vladislav Kovalev, who boasts a rating of 2556 ELO, tries his best to delay the game for as long as possible, but an official comes over and forces the clock to start ticking down. In a blitz match, players only get 3 minutes per game to make their moves, so time management is crucial. Letting your clock tick down to 30 seconds before even showing up? You might as well resign. However, the world champion Magnus Carlsen has other plans. He sprints into the arena with barely any time left on his clock and makes his first move. Pawn to e6. This is more commonly known as the French defense and typically leads to slower games, meaning that if Magnus wants to defend his title, he's going to need a miracle. Vladislav plays pawn to d4, making a play for the center 4 squares, which are typically seen as the strongest on the board. Without any hesitation, Carlsen responds with pawn to d5. Both players exchange in the center, opening up the e-file and leaving both kings exposed. Vladislav chooses to develop his knight to f3, while Carlsen decides to bring his dark-squared bishop out to d6. Vladislav takes some time to think about his next move before advancing a pawn to c4, once again threatening the middle 4 squares. Magnus takes this opportunity to bring his knight out to f6, developing a piece while also defending the pawn on d5. Vladislav takes almost a full minute to decide his next move, and brings his knight out to d3 to once again attack the d5 square. Meanwhile, Magnus's experience is showing, and it only takes him 2 seconds to decide his next move, castling his king to safety. Kovalev lets his clock tick down another 60 seconds before taking his next turn. While he could be calculating his next moves, it's more likely that this is a show of ultimate sportsmanship, letting his time tick down to create a more fair game for Magnus, because right about now, the real game begins. Magnus moves his rook to e8, checking Vladislav and removing his ability to castle his king to safety. Vladislav blocks the check with his light-squared bishop, however that bishop is now pinned. Magnus develops his second knight off its starting square to d7. At the same time, in an amazing show of confidence, he actually takes a couple seconds to straighten up his pieces before ending his turn. Because his king is no longer directly in check, Vladislav is allowed to castle and gets his king away to safety. After a few more moves, Magnus takes on d5 with his knight. And this is where the fun begins. Kovalev attacks Magnus's knight by bringing out his light-squared bishop to f3. Magnus responds by defending the square with his pawn, moving it to c6. Both players then bring their queens out to the b-file, offering a trade. Unfortunately for Vladislav, Carlsen is known as the endgame god, and any trading of major pieces will more than likely favor him. Vladislav knows not to get into a quick endgame battle against the world champion, and instead takes on d5. Magnus trades, Vladislav recaptures with his bishop, and then Magnus recaptures with a pawn. With only 11 seconds left on his clock, and quickly running out of time, Vladislav opts for a queen trade after all, looking to simplify the game, as things are about to get wild. Unfortunately, though, he had no idea what was about to come from the defending champion. Magnus moves his kingside pawn forward, kicking the white knight and forcing him to retreat, which reveals an attack on the white e1 rook. Carlsen gladly takes the trade, checking Vladislav on the back rank in the process. He recaptures with his bishop, and both players now have under 10 seconds to work with, despite the game still being dead even. Magnus moves his rook forward to a4, planning an attack. Vladislav responds by bringing his bishop forward to c3. Magnus attacks again, bringing his own light-squared bishop to f5 and forcing Vladislav's knight to retreat for a second time. And for the first time this game, things are beginning to look a little dicey for Vladislav. He's now down to only 4 seconds and actually behind Carlsen on time. Magnus forces a series of trades on b4, pawn for pawn, bishop for bishop. While the value of pieces traded was technically equal, Carlsen comes out on top of this trade since he now has a much better position on the board. Both players attempt to bring their kings towards the center, and Magnus checks his opponent with bishop to b5. Vladislav retaliates by using his king to attack Magnus's rook on a2, forcing it to retreat. He then trades on c4 with his knight. checking Magnus. A seemingly decent move, however this would prove to be the beginning of the end for the Belarusian player. Magnus captures on d5 with his king, simultaneously threatening Vladislav's rook. He quickly moves it away to safety, but Carlsen has no intention of giving him any breathing room, attacking it again with his king and then again with his rook, in the end winning himself a pawn. Vladislav retaliates by moving his rook over to d6, returning a check to Magnus. However, it's too little too late, as Magnus captures yet another pawn, and after a few more moves, both players shake hands and Kovalev retires, giving Magnus the win.